We'd now like to move on to our next panel session on mobilizing the vehicle as a service ecosystem, brought to us by Mobilize, Renault's mobility platform. Please could our speakers join me on stage? Brilliant. Let's jump straight in and welcome our speakers. So we've got Chantal, the Chief Operating Officer at Mobilize Beyond Automotive, Dara, Head of Strategic Projects at iCabby, and Mark, Managing Director at Mobilize Power Solutions. But first, I would like to offer the floor to Chantal, a few words from our panel keynote speaker.
Good afternoon and welcome to this Mobilize-sponsored panel. Mobilize may be new to a few of you, so let me please take a moment to put the brand into context as part of the wider Renault Group and explain our plans to address mobility as a service and vehicle as a service needs. Renault Group is currently undergoing a major transformation named the Renaulution. In order to become a next-generation automotive company, the group will have 5 focused businesses, of which Mobilize is one. Dedicated to new mobility solutions and tackling the major challenges facing the automotive industry, Mobilize encourages a sustainable energy transition in line with Renault Group's goal of achieving carbon neutrality in Europe in 2040 and globally by 2050. Mobilize consists of 3 main areas: mobility solutions, covering subscription services, dedicated vehicles; energy services, with the brand Mobilize Power Solutions, our lead in home and public and business charging. And in the UK, we also have Mobilize Financial Services, providing retail and corporate finance solutions. So what are the trends facing us as an industry? Electric vehicles, as we've heard today, generally higher priced than their ICE equivalents, with demand for services that support their ecosystem now also being required alongside the charging infrastructure. Connectivity, increasingly more data is being produced by the car, providing us with a lever to optimize our operations. Customer behavior, increasing the need for flexibility, and convenience and frictionless services are now a must in this business. And then finally, regulations and policies. The vehicle life, its first, second, third, and ultimate disposal is our responsibility to manage. We require policies that allow users to pick the right mobility solutions for the job to be done with the lowest environmental impact. So what are our new customer expectations and why do business models need to change in this area? Usage models are predicted to grow with more rent versus own over the medium to long term. In the past, buy, lease, or rent vehicle were standard options for owning a car. However, since the emergence of services like the subscription model, the automotive industry needs to adapt to cater for the short-term flexible and the swappable models, as have other sectors. All these industries have one thing in common in that they have been disrupted by the digital sector, driven by technical innovations and changing customer behaviors, making flexibility in duration and service offering a must in this market. So why do we think vehicle as a service is so important in our business? We see it as the 4th gateway to the car. Vehicle as a service delivers with the flexibility that users now expect, simplifying the movement of people and goods, making life easier for all involved, are the obvious benefits to those who opt into the vehicle as a service or indeed the mobility as a service system. But it's also expected to have a multi-level impact on sustainability through extended life of vehicles, the energy transition, and a move over to EV. First, the vehicle that linked to an ecosystem can be tailored or personalised to all travel needs. The digital ecosystem brings together the network of experts. That means personalised support is guaranteed for every user, whether a transport professional or the final end user. The payment solutions and insurance and maintenance are taken care of within a single bundled services that simplify our customers' daily lives. And finally, VAS is a model that can support making the switch to electric an easier option by removing and dulling the noise often cited as barriers to making the change, such as cost of vehicles, charging and charging infrastructure, and uncertainty and reliability around new technology. I've referred to VAS and mobility as a service in tandem with each other, and the reason is to many an extent they are intrinsically linked to each other when you map out the entire value chain. Mobility as a service platforms that support end-to-end trip planning and payment services across all modes of public and private transportation. As an example, what to the taxi fleet owner is a vehicle as a service bundled offering, to the taxi driver is not only part of the VAS system, but equally taking his fare bookings through a mobility as a service platform. Mobilise proposes the perfect object for urban mobility and last mile services. In its urban quadricycle version, Mobilise Duos offers 2 tandem seats. In its utility version, Mobilise Bento has the capacity to accommodate long loads and meet the needs of artisans as well as last mile delivery professionals. To summarise, comprehensive flexible services adapt to the need, simplifying the movement of people and goods, making life easier for all involved are obvious benefits to those who opt into the vehicle as a service system and key empowering new mobilities. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you for that introduction, Chantal. Sets up really nicely. A Bain & Company survey of 1,500 automotive users demonstrated indeed a demand for about 30% of users wanting flexible subscription as a service-based business models, moving away from ownership to usership. So 100% see that that is increasingly the trend. I'd love to understand, Dara, from yourself first, how do you see the need of vehicle as a service, particularly working for iCabby? How does that kind of really materialize itself? How has it helped?
From the taxi industry perspective, and from people in the audience that don't know about iCabby, iCabby's 50,000 drivers on our software in the UK. We're in the States, the Nordics, Australia, Spain. So we have thousands of drivers around the globe. And when we looked at vehicle as a service, why did we do it? It was basically due to cost initially. So back in 2019, we'd done a pilot in Sheffield where we implemented Renault Zoe cars into Sheffield taxis, which it was the second biggest polluter in Sheffield as well, which meant that we were helping the council targets, helping government targets. But ultimately, why were we doing it? We were doing it to save fleets money and the drivers money. But when you say cost, I think it falls under 3 different pieces now, because after the pilot, COVID kicked in, so it was kind of put on hold for a while. So then when we looked at it again last year, we seen you're now talking about ULEZ charges, you're now talking about the cost of EV cars, which are, when we looked at it, it's about 1/3 more expensive than ICE cars. And then thirdly as well, when I say cost, the taxi industry lost a lot of drivers to Amazon during COVID, all of the delivery companies. Those taxi drivers ultimately don't have the money to get back in under the new restrictions. So we were trying to enable taxi fleets to attract drivers, because there's a big shortage globally of taxis. I think everyone's standing there waiting on the driver to arrive or even pick up your request. It's taken a while. But then when we looked at the ULEZ charges as well, it's just under £3,500 a year for drivers driving ICE cars to go into ULEZ zones. In London, you can't register an ICE car, it has to be EV now. So we, as a Renault Mobilise company, utilised Renault being able to provide us with cars and us being able to roll them out to the fleets. So I mean, yeah, the knock-on effects are huge. So that's why we were looking into it, and ultimately to create sticky drivers and save money for the taxi industry.
100%. That survey that I mentioned earlier had 40 to 50% respondents kind of saying that price is the biggest reason that really matters. So that's 100% a clear factor and motivation driver. Really helpful to see how that's actually being put to practice. That's brilliant. Mark, I'd love to understand from you, how are we seeing this rise now from switching from a usage-based model, switching to a usage-based model, so from ownership towards usership?
So, good afternoon, everybody. Just to introduce us, because you may never have heard of us. So, Mobilize Power Solutions, we're the EV charging infrastructure company for Renault, Nissan, Mitsubishi Alliance. We've been in Europe since 2011, 2012, really from the start and the launch on the market of the Renault Zoe, Nissan Leaf. So we've been around providing the infrastructure that supported those early adopters and early projects that the group was performing. We brought the business to the UK in 2021, so we're very young in this arena. But we're principally here to provide the technology support and also the EV charging infrastructure to businesses that are looking to adopt for the future as well as here and now. In terms of usage models, we're starting to already start to see a shift. And that's more about how the businesses are now starting to pay for those services. From our point of view, we have a sister company, Mobilize Financial Services, as you saw on the PowerPoint. And Mobilize Financial Services allow us to provide the finance to a business to do that. That's a straightforward finance agreement for the whole infrastructure project. That really old financing, really. You take that as a given. We started to move into leasing of the business hardware and then what that then means. And actually today, where we are, and we've already heard some messages today about power, getting the power to these chargers. It was interesting listening about what's going to be demanded on trucks. I think it was Anthony from Gregory Distribution who was talking earlier. This is significant power, where 600 kilowatt charger is kind of a minimum requirement of where we're going. So we're introducing batteries. I can tell you those batteries are not cheap, but more the case now where solar power. So you're not just talking about a charging infrastructure installation. It goes hand in hand with solar, battery, and charging in one kind of one mission. And to do that, we're seeing an increase on power purchase agreements, where the cost of the business is kind of being spread over a number of years. What that then allows us to do, because seeing one vision, being part of the Renault-Nissan group, we can start to see what the technology on the vehicles is coming at us. And what does that mean for the customer? Well, it gives an infrastructure. I'm not sure I like the term future-proof, because it's really difficult to launch that. Sorry. But what it does do is pave the way for a business being almost in a position that they can upgrade over a period of time. These power purchasing agreements are typically 25 years.
Brilliant. And we 100% can see that transition towards the whole ecosystem solution, right? It comes with a transition when you're looking to electrify. And so, Chantal, would love to understand from you, how does this model start to enable people towards that electrification, towards those sustainable solutions that they need faster?
We believe it has got a bit of a multi-level effect. So a bit like with subscription models and other type models, the ability to support customers move into EV quicker. We've talked about today about a few of the barriers in terms of whether that's cost, lack of knowledge to some extent, charging infrastructure, and all of those kind of technology type worries that customers have when they move. That's no different in the fleet or the vehicle as a service industry either. The customers, or generally the companies we deal with, we need to go through step by step, and we can pull all of that knowledge together into one bundle, so that we're really addressing each of those barriers. The additional thing is not necessarily with the EVs, but equally continued use of second, third life vehicles in this subject as well. So the ability to pull other vehicles from all different other sectors into this as well as a sustainable model. So using the vehicles for longer and looking after them as we go along.
Yeah, absolutely. And Mark, I'd love to understand on that point that Chantal just touched on, some of the barriers in this ecosystem. If I flip it around, what do you see are the key enablers in really making some of this ecosystem come to life?
In a lot of cases, it's being able to finance it. I think money talks in this game, and really having business easy access to the finance and funding. We have really a headwind in the UK where the subsidy is available to businesses, and charge point operators in the room will know this, that it's not great. When we compare to other countries in Europe, there are significant subsidies. We're running a project across Europe now called Mobilise Fast Charge, which is to enable dealerships who have the land, because part of the issue with launching these high-powered hubs is to acquire the land. But we know that franchise dealerships have the land. And quite often that is, certainly in Europe where land is perhaps more freely available, an enabler, because it allows us to do that. And customers, drivers, owners, renters are used to dealing with franchise dealers, so they know where to go. There's an element of trust there already. But in order to do that, we need the subsidy to help us roll that out. It's a significant amount of money. And quite often the power is available. It takes a long time to get it to the site where you want to be, but it is possible. But quite often it's the money that needs to be put behind it to get that power to the site.
Absolutely. And I'd love to understand, how do you think about the solution that some of the power flexibility solutions you touched on earlier could help in situations like that?
So it's the typical shifting from CapEx to OpEx. It's a number of businesses that we're talking to right now where it's the inevitable question of, do I spend now? Do I spread it? Do I finance it? We work across the different transport sectors. So whilst we're a Renault Group company, we service the whole sector. So cars, vans, trucks, buses, and even a bit of ship to shore, or shore to ship, actually. So in all of those scenarios, the requirement is very, very different. So it would be easy to say, well, let's look at these power purchasing agreements and spread it over a period of time, but it's not the right solution for everybody. And being in a position with Mobilise Financial Services to be able to offer that, I think, gives a good backbone to finding the financial source to be able to deliver it.
Please, Dara.
What we found, we've done a lot of research around the UK in terms of going to councils and saying, okay, well, if you think about it, the taxi fleet in your town is probably up there with the top polluter. So why don't we help you? But what we require coming back is to go direct to the fleets or direct to drivers to give them the grants. And that's kind of a granular point to what Mark was saying. But I mean, when we talk to those councils, they're very much, okay, perfect, somebody can help us. Because I think there's a good few councils here today, and we'd love to speak to them to say, look, we can help you reach your targets by 2030, etc. But we require some sort of help to the drivers or to the fleets, because like if we looked at fast charging to a fleet, you're talking upwards of £50,000, which it's quite an archaic industry, the taxi industry, where that they say, oh, I'm not really into investing that amount to 50,000. So if we can try and alleviate some of that, then it helps obviously the council's targets for zero emissions by 2030 or 2035, etc. So.
Sorry. It's a really interesting point, because the project we were involved in Sheffield, for example, was born out of the fact that the mayor for that combined authority had a target, and the mayors for the combined authorities have a period of time in office. And he was saying, well, the challenges that I have are the cut in bus services. And frankly, everybody in this room, we either do or could drive an EV, have access to an EV, and we live, and that's our world, and we live in that ecosystem. But for the majority of people in that city, it was just not going to be possible. So how do you replace the typical services when the bus services were reducing to provide a service that could provide mobility for all?
Absolutely. And actually, touching on that, I'd love to get a bit of perspective. Mark, you touched on it earlier, is kind of what is the global sort of view on this? So you've given a really good perspective from UK, and it's Mark or Dara, who could kind of comment a little bit on the global opportunities around this as well.
From our perspective, I was on a call with a company from Holland Thursday. We've just done an integration, 4,800 cars up in the Nordics. They're very interested. Spain, a company in Barcelona, Madrid. iCabby's just rolled out a new new software in the US to be able to do hospital trips. And it's really taken off. It's groundbreaking what we've created. But one thing that I think would be amazing as well is to offer that service, but also offer, let's say, a WAV vehicle that's electric on the back of it. So you can, the wheelchair accessible vehicles that are electric and give the software all in service, because Chantal touched on it earlier in terms of the bundle. The bundle that we offer has service, maintenance and tyres. It's the car, so it's about a hassle-free electric vehicle car that they just get in and drive. The company that we have, that's a Renault company, do the fleet management on the back of the service, maintenance and tyres, so they contact the drivers directly and say you're due your service, and it's in their interest because they keep the warranty, so it's an all-in package. So yeah, and back to your point, every country that we're in, they're asking for us to get them electric vehicles. Probably going on too many calls, too much work coming up at the moment with it. But yeah, it's globally, Australia as well. They're really, really pushing for electric vehicles. And there's a point, I think, even if some people don't really believe in it, they're getting pushed down that way anyway. Like, look at the ULEZ charges, 3,500 out of somebody's pocket. Even if they don't believe in it, they have to start thinking about it. They have to be proactive with it. And through Mobilise, Renault, we're enabling those taxi drivers to be able to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think any customer proposition that simplifies it for the end user, makes it easier to adopt, is exactly the sort of proposition we need. So 100% hear that, and that sounds brilliant. In the last few minutes, I'd love to touch, Chantal, Dara, with yourselves, kind of how you're thinking about the design of the vehicles in this space. It's not quite necessarily for all of the use cases lift and shift.
Yeah, so as you saw, we've developed a specific vehicle in the Duo Bento in terms of thinking about the environment that might cater for in the city and sort of an urban environment, but again also thinking about the usage. So key in this area is around really understanding what the customer needs are, the environment it's going to be operating in, and then how can it service. So those vehicles absolutely need to be connected, ability to function within where we've got restrictions in the city areas. So we're very much looking at not just our existing portfolio, but again, vehicles designed specifically for this space and this environment, and really taking it to the nth degree with, you know, recyclability of the vehicle at the end, so we're not, you know, anything that comes back is less harmful, and then also using recycled parts to start that vehicle. So that whole kind of loop and the circular economy is kind of key in this. So not just the customer end point, but actually the whole complete chain.
Dara, I know you're passionate about accessibility, so I'd love to hear your thoughts on that as well.
Yeah, there's a couple of points, I think, in terms of having cars tailored towards the taxi industry specifically. Per council, you're finding that some cars are perfect. You go to that exact car to another council and it's not. A prime example, we had a car that we were able to convert into wheelchair accessible, brought it to Ireland. It's 28 millimetres below what the tick should be to make it roll out over there. I think OEMs need to look at the taxi industry a little bit different when it comes to EVs. The reason being is because the generic thing for an OEM to do under a lease agreement is run away from the taxi industry, is to not to say, I don't want to have anything to do with it, really. But I think if we look now at EVs, the removal of all of the oil parts, everything, and the need for less, I suppose, servicing, maintenance and tyres on those cars means that it kind of opens that door for OEMs to say, well, maybe we can start going higher mileage on them and we won't see any effects on the car. I know Renault, and we pushed them greatly with this in terms of tailoring a product that we could roll out to the taxi industry. We've done that, and I just advise for other OEMs to start looking at it too, because it's a huge industry. As I said, us ourselves have 50,000 drivers in the UK, and from our perspective, we're not looking to make a lot of money off this whatsoever. iCabby are just trying to provide our drivers with the service to be able to meet the requirement of the government, the pricing that's coming in through ULEZ. So, I mean, we're willing to work and help with that through drivers, and as I said as well, with the government targets, the emission targets, we can help with that too.
Absolutely. I'm going to ask one final question, but I'm going to give a heads up to the audience. I'm going to come to you for Q&A. So if you could think of any questions you want to ask, I will ask a final question to the panel, and then we'll open up the floor. Mark, I know when we were chatting earlier, you were talking to me about some of the issues around getting power to sites. And we were talking about the importance of the power energy system flexibility in order to give that solution. I'd love your perspectives from a Mobilized Power Solutions basis on how you help address getting the power to the site for your end users.
So we encounter the same issues as many other charging infrastructure installers, and you've heard from Ian earlier. These guys, we all have the same issues, and largely that is that we're dealing with district network operators who have different processes with different timescales and different requirements, and that is complicated. It's not quite as complicated as Germany, where they have 937 DNOs, but it is complicated. And I think for us, some kind of standardisation of process with a DNO about how we get access to planning for the power. The other issue that we get is when business come to us to say, I have 100 vehicles coming on the fleet in 3 months, and I need X amount of chargers. That just isn't going to happen. Typically, we need to kind of back plan and go back in time and say, well, look, plan 6 months, 8 months, if you can, plan in advance. My previous role in the group was as the fleet director for Renault, and one of the key things there with fleets is that they get on a cycle. It's a 5 to 7 year cycle of planning of change, and in that planning of change, the charging infrastructure now needs to be part of that cycle of change plan. And tie up the conversations between the fleet managers and procurement, who are not always the same people in the room.
I think from our point of view, the other aspect of that is really understanding the customer needs. So many of the customers will come and they want fast, because fast and rapid is good, right? But there's not necessarily a requirement. Yes, in some cases, and maybe on some of the taxi sites, but not all. So there is this, actually you need to step back and go through the whole process again, and sort of, again, with the same with any customer, whether they're general public or a fleet or a business, it's that there's a knowledge share to start the journey before we even start to even get into any kind of solution. Yeah.
100%. I love that customer-centric approach. Thank you for that. I'll now open up the questions to the audience. If you have a question, if you could raise your hand, the microphone will come towards you. There's one here, please. If you could state your name before you ask a question, that'd be brilliant.
Reza Shaybani, the EV Network. Mark, you mentioned car dealers to open up to charging infrastructure for public. 6 years ago, we spoke to more than 500 different car dealers, some of the big names in the industry. And they told us there are 2 problems. One is they make more money per bay selling second-hand cars. And why would they want to give that away for a very small, those days, relatively a small rental per bay? Passing that, the biggest problem is car dealers close down at night. Public charging needs 24/7 open access to the facility. For security and all sorts of reasons, car dealers close down. How do you get around that? But more important, the fact that they even told us the numbers they make per week selling a second-hand car.
Great question. So a typical car dealer will make, I don't know, Ian might correct me actually, but they're £12,000 per bay 10 times a year. So you're talking £120,000, you can do the maths. So it's good profit that comes out of those bays. And in some of the tight sites, it frankly doesn't work. And you have to have very, very strict criteria. Do they have the space? Are they 2 minutes from a major highway? Frankly, do they have access to power? And who you're trying to work with, not everybody is forward thinking on the detail. And one of the learnings of that is, as we started to project Mobilised fast charge in Europe, in some of the conversations with the franchise dealer, actually it's not the franchise site that they want to put this hub on. They might have a used car supercentre somewhere where they've got spare space. I'm thinking of one now in the south of England. It's right on a major roundabout where the motorway ends and the dual carriageway starts. And, you know, so they do have space. It's about how they start to look at it. They're very interested in how we get the customer, because I think, put myself in the mind of the franchise dealer right now, how do I keep customers coming to my dealership? Most people are speccing cars, and we've all done it, I guess. You go online and you say, well, I want one of these in that colour and I want these accessories, and it's becoming a lot easier to do that. And in some cases for manufacturers, some of the OEMs that we work with now have a full digital e-commerce solution, so actually why do they need to go to the dealer? And so they're either going for used cars, the profit per bay, or they're going for after sales into the service, and they need to drive footfall to the sites. So I guess the argument is, well, be very strict on the criteria of where it's got to go. Secondly, do they have access to other sites? And frankly, being part of a group where the OEM has the franchise agreement with the sites makes that a little bit easier. But it's more about, does it work on that site? Is it accessible? Do they have the space? Can we drive it? And are they forward-thinking enough to say, I know used cars today are in that area, but you know the notion of a used car supercentre going back in time, it has changed. Very professional outfits. So sorry, there was one part of your question which said about access to it 24/7. It needs a redesign of the site. We have challenges with health and safety and insurance issues on those sites, but they're overcome once you can create an accessible area that's available 24/7.
Please.
Jump in there as well. Something again that I think OEMs are not looking at is taxi fleets and the grounds that they have within each city, and being able to implement charging solutions, because they're 24/7. They're in every city. I think there's a huge gap there that people aren't seeing, that they can use fleets. We've worked quite closely with Mark and Mobilise to start looking at sites. And to be fair to taxi drivers, what's happening is fleets own cars. The model that we're creating is that they lease them through us, so they're removing the ownership, so they don't need the spaces in theory, because they're giving the drivers the cars, and they're moving out a garage that's on site as well. So they're putting the power towards the charging, and then and they have the ground. So I think it's something that can be looked at, and Mobilise are being proactive in looking at that too.
Brilliant. Thank you for that, Reza. And thank you to the panel for a lovely, insightful session. I think what Mobilise has to offer in their vehicle as a service offering is clearly quite brilliant in that it brings together so many of the barriers that otherwise exist for users in order to help enable electric vehicle adoption, with Mobilise Power Solutions addressing the charging infrastructure side of things as well. And so I think it is quite an amazing end-to-end service proposition. So thank you so much for introducing that to us this afternoon. It's been incredible having you, and thank you so much for your support to the EV Summit as well.